Let's get started. So we're here to discuss our thoughts on thoughts. Welcome. Good morning. For the sake of the Zoom, good morning, Lynn. Good morning. For the sake of the Zoom, Barry, can we see you? I don't know if we'll get to see Barry. Okay, for the sake of the Zoom, I got a little mic here. So if someone is going to be reading or asking a question, maybe we'll pass that around. I think it should work. So we're talking about thoughts on thoughts. For those on the Zoom, could you see the screen properly? You see my sharing screen?
Part of it, but up to the part where what are your thoughts? Where do they come from?
Yeah, that's it. That's all it is. Okay, perfect. And this should not be shown again. Okay, here we go. So I want to begin by my usual, asking you, what are your questions about thoughts? Some people wrote to me some questions, and that's all. Anyone have any thoughts on thoughts? Where did you come from? What did you want to hear today?
It's a broad question, because you could have thoughts that are arbitrary, that just come into mind when you're doing something. And then you also have thoughts that are more impactful, where it involves decision making.
Sure.
Where you really have to sit down and ponder over.
So we're going to discuss that. That's very good.
And confront them. Sometimes a little more painful than other times. And basically, for me, a thought can be inspired by a song on my radio when I'm driving. And I think of a memory that I've had in the past. I have lots of memories due to my age. So, and parts of my life. So it's sort of like reviewing my existence in some ways.
That's great.
I love to drive for that reason. That's my area of personal life experiences.
Sure.
If you really want to know.
Any thoughts on thoughts? Anyone else want to have a question? You want to share something?
I think she covered it all.
Covered it all.
We got it all.
Okay.
I find it fascinating because it's so powerful.
Because they're powerful.
The space
of thought is powerful.
The space of thought is powerful.
Okay. Anyone on the Zoom has a question? Yes.
I think there are so many stimuli that generate our thoughts. As I think Linda might have expressed, a moment in time that reminds you of something in your past, the aroma of something cooking in your kitchen, which brings everything, warm feelings of the Shabbat or holidays, everything around us. There are so many, I believe, neurotransmitters that help these that channel our thoughts. It's not just one thing can start a thought, but then it goes into many directions.
That's great.
With those thoughts.
That is great. Okay, so a cute line that I saw is, my mind is like a web browser. 19 tabs are open, 17 are frozen, and I have no idea where the music is coming from.
Exactly.
Okay, so to begin, touching on what you said, I want to discuss when we ask what are thoughts, what are we referring to? What's the diameter that we're referring to? You mentioned that there are thoughts that are meaningless, and then there are thoughts that have a lot of meaning. And when we say the word thoughts, what do we mean by the word thoughts? And I want to begin by making a distinction between thoughts and ideas. or thoughts and intelligence. And generally, we tend to mix them up a lot. Like, we'll say standardly, let me think about it. And what we mean to say is, let me intelligize about it. Let me come up with an idea about it. Let me think of ideas. We're not just saying, let me think. We're saying, let me think with content. And is there something called thoughts outside of ideas? And what is the difference exactly between them, which will allow us to ask the question, what are thoughts? And, in a different class, we could talk about what are ideas. So does anyone have any thoughts on that or any ideas on that? Are we with me? Anita, are you with me in this question?
Yeah, yes, it's quite a deep concept. I think thoughts, ideas are more focused, oriented happenings, I guess. I think we might get ideas from our thoughts, or thoughts, or vice versa as well. They can work in sync, perhaps.
Which one comes first, or what is the actual difference? Because technically, as she said, you can have a thought and then an idea comes from it.
Very good.
So, I look at it and I say our thoughts are first, and then the idea comes from the thought.
So that's a great question.
Mm.
Yes.
To me, an idea is conscious. When you're presented with a project, or you're asked to do something, or you're planning something, you have to think of ideas and how that will fit into that plan. So you have to have something, I think, first that you're focusing on that stimulates your idea. If you're given a day, let's say tomorrow's a free day, I'm not working, I need some ideas about what to do on that day. So that's a conscious confrontation or the fact that you have that day, you understand, or you have that project, or it's more structured.
So let me share with you some of my thoughts on this concept. Welcome, Barry. So what's the difference between thoughts and ideas? And this is something that, as a yeshiva bacher learning about these ideas, it's been so obvious to me that it took me time to articulate. And maybe if something is not clear, please ask, and maybe that will make it a little more clear. But let me give you some words and some examples, some definition, which will allow us to recognize what thought is versus what ideas are. It might be a little bit abstract, but just bear with me. So we all have a soul. We discussed that in the past. We have who we are inside, right? We have our essence, our personality, our being, our isness. And that soul comes into this world and relates to this world, has a relationship with this world. In terms of the relationship of the soul to this world, there are generally 3 levels, breaking down in Kabbalah into 10, 11 levels. Those 3 levels is the willpower of the soul, the logic or intelligence of the soul, and the emotions of the soul. Okay? So the soul has 3 types of relationships with this world. One being an emotional relationship, one being an intelligent relationship, and one being a relationship of will, a relationship of himself, of isness, which is beyond intelligence and emotional. Just to let you know, we're not going to go into this at length, so if you're not exactly sure what I'm saying, it's fine. In terms of what is the difference between the emotional connection to this world and the logical intelligence relationship to this world, the answer is, us as beings, when we come into this world, we have a certain reaction to what we're seeing. There's us, and there's the thing, and then there's what stands between us. There's the connection that we have to it. That connection has 2 options. It could either be objective or it could be subjective. We could choose to ask ourselves, what's my take on it? or what does it give me? Or we could choose to ask ourselves, what does it say? What is it about? Now, the ability to be objective is purely a human capability. An animal doesn't do that. An animal looks at a table and simply asks, what could I use it for? Or how do I feel about it? The animal will never pose the question, what is the table made up of? So humans have this dual relationship with this world, that we could have either or a personal relationship, how it contends to me, an emotional relationship, or an intellectual relationship, which is objectivity. What is it about? Okay, that's in terms of our relationship with the world. That's in terms of how our soul connects to things outside of itself. Practically speaking, we have three tools in which any of the above are expressed. And those three tools are called thought, speech, and action. In Kabbalah, those three tools are called clothing. Unlike our body, which is ourselves, right? Our hands are part of who we are. Our eyes are part of who we are. Although it's not our soul, but it's the way our soul expresses itself directly in this world, right? Our soul completely, conforms into the body, takes over the body. And when you look at someone, it's you looking at them. It's not you looking at them through your eyes. It's you looking at them. Your clothing is not you. Your clothing is simply the way you present yourself. Thought, speech, and action are going to be the garments, the clothing in which we activate our soul and any part of our soul, including our emotions and our intellect. So let's talk about speech and action first. That's obviously much easier to discuss. Speech is clearly a way that we could express our emotions to someone else or express our ideas to someone else. Speech is the only way that we can interact with another being. Yes? Action is even further than speech in terms of leaving the person. Action is the person not only communicating with another, but affecting another in the sense that they could leave and their effect remains. Another difference between speech and action, which is connected to this idea, is that speech is limited to human beings. I could only speak to another human. Why? Because since speech is closer to me, it doesn't go that far. I have to have a relatable relationship with that person to be able to speak to them. Action, on the other hand, welcome, Robert. Action, on the other hand, is completely objective from the person, completely separated from the person. It's the ability for a person to reach further than himself. Not just speech, where he still has to be present, but an action where he doesn't have to be present at all. When someone speaks, although what's very much here is the listener, the speaker is also here. You'll know who's speaking. You'll recognize their voice. In a case of action, that person could leave and you have no idea who did this. You're like, who moved the table? Who did this? Who made that piece of work, that piece of art? Art is so incredible because it's the ability to put your soul on an action which is completely outside of you. But again, that's another conversation, and we're not going to go into that right now. So let's go back to thought. Here it becomes tricky, because speech and action was clearly the way you were expressing your faculties. But thought seems to be just you. So why are we calling thought a clothing? Why are we calling thought a tool for those inner faculties? And this is as I mentioned, an abstract idea, because like many of us mentioned, you'll never have an idea without a thought. Every idea could only be accessed through a thought. But the point is as follows. Just like speech is letters, is words, it's vessels which express content, and without those vessels, the content cannot be expressed to someone else. So speech is vessels that are understood by another. Thought is vessels. Thought is a space in which something could be expressed, whether it's intelligence, whether it's emotion. The concept of an idea versus the expression of the idea are two different points, although they come together, but it's two different things happening in the being. The person is having this idea and they're experiencing it. The fact that they're able to experience it and the fact that they're having it are two different things. Put it this way. There's certain emotions that we have that we're not aware of all the time. And we become aware of them at certain points. So where are they? They're still there, but they're not in our thoughts. We're not experiencing them. We're not thinking about them. So the experience and it are two different things. We could have an opinion that we're not thinking about. It's still our opinion. It still makes up our soul. But we only are experiencing that opinion. We're only aware of that opinion to ourselves when we think about it. With that said, we can understand that now that we understand that thoughts are just an open vessel, an open area, which have no meaning, we understand that thoughts could also be meaningless. Thoughts don't have to have ideas to be thoughts. Just like words, you could speak gibberish. The words don't have to have any meaning. A thought cannot have any meaning. The way I see it, and it could be I'm wrong about this, is that you'd look at a baby and a newborn child that came into this world, and they're looking around and they're touching and they're laughing and they're smiling. There's something going on there. They're aware, but do they have ideas? Is their brain developed yet? Are they coming up with ideas? Is there logic behind what they're seeing, what they're looking around and perceiving? They're simply perceiving, they're simply looking. Right? And the same way, I could say 2 + 2 = 5, even though there's no idea in those words. I could think 2 + 2 = 5, even though there's no idea, there's no content to those thoughts. Yes? This is making sense? Is it too abstract? Is that? So with that said, we kind of came to some sort of conclusion, recognition, how ideas and thoughts are two different things. And over here in our conversation, we're not asking the question, what's the power of ideas? We're asking the question, what's the power of thoughts? And what's very interesting is the reason why this is such a good question is because on the one hand, thoughts don't have content. They're just words. They're just letters. They're just a vessel. Ideas, emotions clearly have power. They're expressions of the soul. Thoughts is not an expression of the soul. It's a tool that we all equally share. My emotions and your emotions are completely distinct from each other because it's your emotion versus my emotion. But our thoughts, the power of thought, the power of awareness, the power of expression is the same. We share it the same way. So on the one hand, it doesn't carry the power of the soul, the power of an idea. On the other hand, speech clearly has a power because it has a power outside of me. I could get things done. I could tell people to do things. I could hire someone. I could express my thoughts. But when I just have a thought and no one knows about it, is there really power to it? And this is the question. We'll talk about positive thinking or mindfulness, or we'll get to this later, the concept of thinking Torah or thinking about God. Is that something that changes the world? Is that something that has an effect on our surroundings? Which this is going to be a very interesting conversation. Okay. With that said, I think we're ready to go on to the next point. I'm going to make one more point before we go on to the next point, which is as follows. Do we have any questions over here from on the Zoom? Are there any questions?
Processing.
Okay, I'll take that as a no. So one more point that I want to make is that you asked before, what comes first? The thought or the intellect? Does anyone have an idea? Now that I explained the difference between ideas and thoughts, what would you say came first?
Thoughts.
Why?
You don't have the intellect, you don't have the thought. If you don't have intellect and your brain is dead, well, now you're getting into science.
So let's take it from the top, the way I expressed it to you before. What's more part of the soul? The idea or the thought? The idea. The soul is just using the thought to access the idea, right? To experience that idea. But in terms of what's the soul is the idea or the emotion. So that clearly came first, right? As you correctly said. It was first the idea, the intelligence, and then from there came the thought, which expressed it, which allowed me to experience that idea. You'll disagree. Now, there's an interesting verse which states, Yisrael alu b'machshava. The Jewish people have arisen in God's thought, which is supposed to express the connection between the Jewish people and God. And the question is, why does that express our connection? Seemingly, thought, as said, is an external thing. Other times it says that the Jewish people stem from the wisdom of God. Wisdom, ideas, depth, soul, real connection. But the Jewish people come from the thought of God. Is that a thing? Is that depth? Why does that show on a real, deep connection to God?
So then it's still then saying, isn't where's the intellect coming from? Or the thought from God, because which we really are. It is he intelligent? I mean, I guess what I'm having a problem with is that I really believe that our thoughts are very powerful, especially when it comes to God. And I think that when we speak words that are connected to that thought, they can be powerful also, whether they're positive or they're negative. So I don't, just like you were talking about the baby. The baby doesn't have the brain power, but when the baby's looking and you always is supposed to give them the colors, they're cooing. So something's going on.
So that might be the ideas behind the thoughts.
Primal though, too.
Make sure you make a distinction between the thoughts and the ideas. I want to, before I answer my question about Yisrael Machshava, I think I'll add something which might give us more clarity on this. I lost my train of thought. 1 second.
What you were thinking.
My train of thought. So I'll add something which might clarify this, and we have to make sure to keep in line this distinction. So Kabbalah teaches us that one of the differences between inner faculties, namely logic and emotion, and our clothing, which is thought, speech, and action, is that our inner faculties, our powers of our soul, are part and parcel of our soul, versus our tools are simply tools that we use. Thought, speech, and action are simply tools that could be used and not used. A practical difference between those two things is that an opinion or an emotion is very hard to change. It's not easy to move from one emotion to another emotion, or from one perspective of life to another perspective of life. Versus our levushim, our clothing, our tools are easily turned off or changed. I could decide to speak about one thing, and I could change it to something else. I could not speak at all. I could do and not do. Hold on 1 second. Give me a second. So this is a distinction that's made between our clothing versus our inner faculty. The question becomes, what about thought? Thoughts we cannot turn off. We can't turn off thoughts. We always are thinking. Why? Maybe we'll get to that later, but you're always thinking. That's the job of the brain. So seemingly, thoughts are clearly closer to the soul, but are they really only a garment that I could take off and put back on and put a different garment on? Or are they more part and parcel with the brain? And the answer is they are clearly more part of the brain, more part of the soul, but although they cannot be taken off, they cannot be turned off, but they can be easily changed. So if you're, hold on one second, if you're having one thought, you could easily switch to another thought, right? Give me 1 second, which is why Hasidic masters say if you're thinking about something that you don't want to think about something else. The mistake that we make is we say, I'll stop thinking about it. But then your mind's empty, you'll go right back to there because you can't stop thinking. What you got to do is you got to open up a book that's talking about something else and read it, and then your mind will go there, right? So thoughts are easily changed. And I know you'll disagree, and you got to give me a minute for that. Thoughts are easily changed, but not removed. The question becomes, we all know the experience of obsessing over a thought. We all know the experience of trying to change what we're thinking about, and we simply can't. Our brain keeps on going back there. And the question is, so how could we say that thoughts are easily changed? And the answer is very simple. The answer is, what's getting us hooked on that thought is not the thought, it's the emotion or the logic behind the thought. We're not hooked on the words, we're hooked on the soul that's in that thought. But when you have a thought that doesn't have content, you can easily change it. The only thing that we get hooked to is the idea, is the emotion, which is embedded in that thought that we're experiencing with that thought, which is why it's hard to change. As said, it's hard to change an emotion. It's hard to change an idea. No one's going to disagree with that. What's not hard to change is words. Words that are in your brain. Give me 1 second. And therefore, coming back to our conversation, it's very important to keep that distinction in mind. Do not confuse them. Here we're only talking about thoughts, the power of thought, putting words in my brain, versus having an internal emotional or intellectual experience. Yes?
So, your question was what came first, thoughts and ideas. Now, I understand when you say that idea is part of your soul, but in order to have ideas, you need to have thoughts, in which your thoughts, you go over using your intelligence, to go over and say, well, I have an idea how to make a light work, right? So without thoughts, you can't have ideas. So I get what you're saying, but how
So
do you have thoughts without, how to get ideas without thoughts?
So Tommy's question is how could we say that ideas, intelligence is deeper than thought? Not deeper, came before thought, if you have to have a thought to experience the intelligence? Should be a pretty simple question. And I believe the answer to that question, I hope I'm not going to contradict myself soon, but I believe the answer to that question is that we are bigger than our experiences. Our soul has levels. And there's the part of our soul that's the experiential part of our soul, and there's the part of our soul which is deeper than that experience. And although we may not be aware of that soul, but there we have intelligence, there or somewhere else over there we have emotions, somewhere else over there there's subconscious, a deeper level, even more abstract levels of the soul. And therefore the concept of having to experience it in order to have it is an external part of our soul. It's not who we are. Which is why I say that you don't have to be experiencing an idea to have the idea. You have to be experiencing it to be aware of it. You don't have to be experiencing an emotion to have that emotion. Like I said, you could have emotions towards people, but you're not actually experiencing it right now. It's not in your thought. Where is it? If we were limited to our experiences, then if we're not experiencing it, it doesn't exist. But in truth, that's not the case. We are more than just our experiences. Does that answer your question?
Makes sense.
A little abstract?
That makes a lot of sense.
Makes a lot of sense. On the other hand, I want to get back to our previous conversation, which was, what does it mean that the Jewish people have arisen in God's thought? And the answer is that Kabbalah teaches us that although thought is an external faculty, but there's something called pnimius hamachshava, inner thought. There's a deeper level of thought, which is not only secondary to ideas, but it's the most inner part of the soul, beyond our ideas and beyond our emotions. And that part of the soul is the awareness of self. So the experience of an idea, the experience an emotion, is something which is more external, comes after the idea or after the emotion. But the simple experience of self, the simple awareness of myself, that I am, that I'm present, this is not really thought. It's not an active thought. The awareness of anything. Think about the fact that you don't have to be thinking about your hand to know that your hand's part of you. It's just part of who you are. That is a certain level of awareness, which is much more abstract than the thought that we've been talking about until now. And that's the meaning of the verse. Yisrael alu b'machshava. The Jewish people have arisen in thought. What's arisen? Why have they arisen?
Elevated.
They have arisen because they went to a deeper level of thought. They're not just on a basic level of thought, which is where the world has come from, but we stem from a deeper level of thought. Okay, back to our conversation. I hope I didn't lose the entire crowd. Little bit abstract. We've been talking about the powers of the soul, the intellectual powers of the soul, the emotional powers of the soul. We've been talking about the tools that the soul has to use those powers, thought, speech, and action, and exactly how we define thought within that entire map. And here comes the question, do thoughts have power? Now, before we continue to a more of a Talmud style conversation on this, which I think is going to be a lot of fun. I think Lynn will join in then. I don't know if Lynn is with us right now. I want to make a point, which Hasidus mentions, about the unique power of these external capabilities, thought, speech, and action, showing how not only are they powerful, but the further you go, in a way, the more power they have. In a way, action is more powerful than speech, speech more powerful than thought, and thought more powerful than our inner emotions. And why is that? The reason that is because although they're more external, the ability for the soul to be external stems from a deeper part of the soul. Intelligence or emotions don't have the ability to reach outwards, to express themselves. That ability for expression, that ability to be bigger than myself, to the point of action that I could have an effect completely outside of myself, that stems from a deeper part of the soul. And therefore, I'll make 2 points, practical points, where we see that depth, where we see that power of our clothing. Point number 1 is, if any of you have ever invested in speech or action, let's talk about if someone wrote a book, or if someone did a lot of exercise, or if someone tried to memorize something over a long period of time, anything accumulated, right? Whether it's building up body mass or building up words on a page, anything accumulated. If you built a house, if you look back at your work a year later, you'll be like, who made this thing?
How did I do that?
How did I do that? Where did that come from? Because a physical thing in this world that was built up accumulated over a period of time outside of myself has the ability to become bigger than myself. Oh, welcome.
I didn't know it's here.
I would have texted you if you messaged me. We got a chair for you right here. Yes. Just careful the wire. The ability to have words or to have an action is something which stems bigger than me. I'll give it a simple anecdote for this. It's something that I think we all experience. If someone has ever come to us and told us, I don't know if you realize this, but 3 years ago I was going through a crisis and I spoke to you and you told me something and it changed my life. Right? Or someone's, my grandfather had a conversation with someone once, and because of that conversation, they had a child. And you're like, did I actually do that? And meanwhile, at this point in time, you're experiencing a crisis yourself. At this point in time, you're the one that's suffering. And you're like, somehow, I alleviated that person's pain. And that fact remains. So in other words, our ideas and our emotions are only with us when we have them. But our thoughts, speech and action, being that they're words, they remain after we left them. They continue to remain. And they continue to accumulate and therefore could create something which is far beyond our existence. And this is the power of doing a mitzvah. This is the power of putting on tefillin or lighting Shabbos candles. We're putting something out there in the world which is bigger than ourselves. Our emotions and our intellect don't have that capacity to handle bigger than ourselves, to handle God. But the ability to step out of myself and do something beyond me does have that power. So that's number one. Number two is that thought, speech, and action have the ability to influence ourselves. Like the famous saying, fake it till you make it. Sometimes you have an idea, and only after expressing that idea to somebody else does that idea become clearer. Or maybe you have a new idea, which is deeper than that idea. Because being that speech stems from a deeper part of our soul, when we activate it, we're steering a deeper part of our soul, which actually ends up feeding more into our intelligence and our emotions. When I speak about my emotion, I'm fueling the fire, right? Because I'm bringing in a deeper level of experience into my soul. So to sum it up, what we said was thought, speech, and action is more external than our inner faculties, yet at the same time, there's a depth to them, which are beyond our inner faculties, both in the sense in what they could accomplish more than ourselves, and the way they could influence our own thought, speech, and action. If someone is feeling negative about something, they could do positive things that will get them into that mode. There was once a man by the name of Rabbi Zeitlin, passed away a number of years ago. He was a shliach in Tzfat, and he one time told the Rebbe in a private audience that he gets very depressed. He has an issue, he gets depressed. The Rebbe said if he ever gets overwhelmed with a negative emotion, he should dance. And one time he was headed to give a Tanya class. And he's driving in Israel, and he on the way to the Tanya class, and he gets a call, and he's told that his child was in a severe car crash. Mm-hmm. And he completely melted, and he did not have this ability to go into the class, and he's sitting on a main street in Tel Aviv, and he can't get himself to go give the class. He's just stuck. And he remembered what the Rebbe told him. So in the middle of Tel Aviv, he's sitting on this main street in his car, and he pictures the Rebbe singing a a lively song, and the Rebbe is standing up and dancing, and he starts dancing, and he starts clapping, and he's dancing, and he's da 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 da. The guys are looking at this crazy guy. He's going, but that lifted up his spirit, and he went and gave the class. Our actions have the ability to pull us out of a situation. Our actions, our speech, our thoughts have the ability to move us from one place to another. Okay, that is all for a 50-minute introduction. We can now begin the class. Okay, so move on. Take the paper that you have in front of you, and let me see if I could share with you guys in the Zoom. I should have done this earlier. Give me 1 second. What I'm going to do is, I think I'm going to put the Word document into the comments, if that works for you. Let me find it.
And you could also share it on your screen.
I know, but I want that this should be shared.
Oh yeah, okay.
There's too much going on here.
Okay, it's fine.
Here we go. So this is a Word document, which I think you should be able to access.
Got it. Thank you.
You could try to download it or open it up as you wish. Okay.
Yeah.
We are going to start off with text number 1. And here we're going more into a Talmudic discussion, or more of a halachic discussion about the power of thought versus the power of speech. And I just want to preface, in Torah law, there is the ability to sanctify something. When we sanctify something, there's 2 aspects to that sanctification. One is the meaning, the implication for ourselves. We now have an obligation to do something with that, whatever we sanctified it for. And the second is the holiness of the thing itself. Now, I'll give you an interesting anecdotal example for this. So, tefillin, which is a holy object, is not allowed to be brought into an impure space. One of those unclean spaces, which is not supposed to be brought into, is a bathroom. Okay? Because a bathroom is unclean, we should not bring tefillin into a bathroom. Halacha says, if you built a room and you designate it as a bathroom, but you've never used it yet as a bathroom, you've only designated it as a bathroom, it should already not be used to bring tefillin in there, because it already is a bathroom. So it's designated as a bathroom, it is a bathroom, it's impure, it's unclean, do not bring the tefillin in there, which I think tells you a number of things about this law, but definitely tells you the power of making something with our intentions or with our words. We designated something, and it takes on a meaning outside of our own obligation. So aside from the fact that I have an obligation to do what I promised to do, but my words actually affected the reality outside of myself. And the question becomes, is that unique to words, or is it also about thoughts? If I promised that I'm gonna donate this phone to Chabad Manhasset, okay, is that only my obligation, or does that become the truth of the phone, that it now has to go to Chabad Manhasset? It's the holiness. The phone takes on a certain holiness, or a certain property, that it doesn't belong to me anymore. It belongs to the members of Chabad Manhasset. It has to be given to that place. But is that only my obligation? Or is that the obligation of the phone, that the phone is misused in another circumstance? And the answer is if I said it, if I stipulated it, then it for sure takes on that holiness. Right? If I said this cow is going to be a sacrifice, it's a holy cow. Hence, holy cow. However, what if I just thought this cow is going to be a sacrifice? Do I only have an obligation to bring it, or is the cow also holy? This becomes the question. Is the cow holy through thoughts or only through speech? It's a purely halachic question. It's not necessarily a psychological question. It might have psychological implications. We might learn from it, but here the discussion is a halachic question. Yeah, sure.
As a kosher or acceptable item to be sanctified by description, the knowledge, and when you're giving it, doesn't it become that item?
So definitely when you gave it, it becomes holy.
Oh, but what happens?
Even before, the question is what happens before you gave it. Is it already holy before you gave it? Right, I'll give you a simple. Yeah, that's the question. Yeah. I'll give you a simple implication of this. So if there's only certain animals that are allowed to be sacrificed. So what if someone said that I'm going to sacrifice this animal and it's able to be sacrificed, and then the sacrifice this animal became blemished? What do you do with the animal? So if the animal is not holy, so then you don't bring it. That's what you do. Maybe you give the money instead. You give the value of it, but you simply don't bring it. If it's holy, then you can't use it now for your own personal needs. You got to slaughter. You got to do something. There's different laws of how to deal with it. But it cannot be used for personal needs. Give me 1 second. I want to just pause that. We're back. Okay. Okay, so let us begin with text number 1. Joanne, I'm going to ask you to read. This is a Mishnah in the Tractate of Kinnim, first chapter, the second Mishnah. Go for it.
What is it now?
Take this 1 second.
What is a vow? Neder? One who says it is upon me to bring an olah offering. And what is a donation? Nevada? One who says, behold, this animal is an olah offering.
Okay, so there's a difference between someone that says, I'm going to bring a animal, or someone that says, I'm going to bring this animal. But the similarity between the two is they both are said. This is something that we do see from this Mishnah. You could pass the mic, and let's move on to text number 5. This is a text written by the Alter Rebbe, the first Chabad Rebbe, from the Kutei Torah, which is a work that he wrote on the Bible. It's a Hasidic work on the Bible, and often he'll take ideas from the Talmud and show us the inner meaning of those ideas. I'm not going to explain a lot of the depth of this, but we're just going to focus on our question over here. Is it thoughts that sanctify, or is it words that sanctify? Go for it.
And the reason one must sanctify the offering specifically through speech. This is because by verbally sanctifying the korban, he draws upon it the level of makif, surrounding life. Just as a vow, like a korban, is elevated through the sanctity of the mouth by declaring it, one draws down the makif light. This is the meaning of the word makdish, to sanctify, similar to kiddushin, betrothed, which draws down makif light. Through this, there is ultimately unification and intimacy, which represents the internal light. Likewise, by sanctifying the korban with the mouth, he draws makif light upon it, and then, when it is offered as a korban to God, an eternal light is drawn in, and through that, the person is elevated as stated above.
Okay. So the number one thing that we see from here is that the concept of sanctity, the concept of bringing holiness into another thing, is specifically done through speech and not through thought. Okay. Moving right along, we have over here a picture of Rashi. And the reason why we have a picture of Rashi, or allegedly Rashi, is because we are going to be discussing Rashi in a moment. Let us move on to text number 7. Tommy, you want to help us with text number 7? You can take the mic. Do we hear in the Zoom, do we hear the people reading the text?
Yes.
Yeah, yes,
Okay,
yes.
that's great. Okay.
Teruma and offerings regarding the contributions
Wait,
to
text number 6. Sorry.
6. Oh, I think you said 7. An objection was raised. That which your lips utter, you shall observe and perform. This teaches only that which was expressed verbally. From where do we learn that a mere resolution in one's heart is also binding? The verse states, every generous hearted person, but that case is different, as it is written. Every generous hearted person, can we derive from there? No, because Ramua and sanctified items are two verses that come as one. Two verses that come as one cannot be used as a precedent for others.
Okay, so let me explain what's going on here. This is a part in the Talmud, and the Talmud is discussing whether our thought could sanctify certain things. And the Talmud brings a proof that that thought could indeed sanctify something. And the proof is brought from teruma. Which teruma? What does teruma mean? Teruma is when someone makes a donation. Where the discussion is about the donations that were brought to the tabernacle in the desert. The verse states, Kol nadiv libo. Anyone that was generous of heart brought his donation for the tabernacle. The Talmud wants to derive from here that to be obligated and bring a donation, it's not enough. You don't have to stipulate it. The simple goodness of heart, the thought to do it, is already an obligation to do it. Says the Talmud, we're not going to learn from there to every other area that thought has power. And the reason is because in the case of karbanot, in the case of sacrifices, the verse also states, Kol nadiv libo, that you bring the sacrifice if you're of good heart, meaning that it's enough to have the thought to bring the sacrifice. Now, there's a very interesting rule in Torah tradition, and this rule is as follows. If we want to know if something is true or not true, if we want to know if there is a general rule, does thought make something holy? All we have to have is one time God tell us thought makes it holy, and we know that in all other circumstances that is also the case. Why does he have to tell us more than once? He told us once to tell us for everything else. That's the rule. That's rule number 1. If you have it once, you know it for everywhere. There's a second rule. If you have it a second time, you only know it for those 2 places. You don't know it for anywhere else. So if God had to tell us in 2 different circumstances that thoughts work, why did he repeat it? He just said it once, and we know it for everywhere. He repeated it because we don't know it for everywhere. He repeated it because it's only true in these circumstances. This is a very simple logical rule. It's a rule that works throughout the entire Talmud, throughout the entire Torah. Anytime that we have a rule, the rule applies to everywhere. But if the rule is repeated, it only applies where it's repeated, it doesn't apply everywhere. And that's why the Talmud says that we do not learn from donations that thought works, although thought works in donations, because it also says clearly that it works for sacrifices. Being that it had to say it twice, we only know it in those two instances. We only know it in those two circumstances. We don't know it everywhere else. And Rashi, right on that Talmud in text 7, tells us from where we learn the two verses of thought, both for the donation as well as for the sacrifice. From here, it would seem that thoughts do have power. Though on the one hand we were saying that we can't learn it to everywhere else, but we were saying that it works in these two circumstances. So unlike what we were saying until now, that certain times you need speech.
You still got the credit of the mitzvah. I think we're back. We back?
Yeah, tell me again.
So I believe your father was once quoting the Rebbe, and he said that if you had the intention to do a specific mitzvah and something happened and you just weren't able to do it, that you still got the credit for the mitzvah. It still counted. I wonder if that is the same concept you're bringing down here.
Right. So there's a rule. Machshava tova HaKadosh Baruch Hu mitzarfa l'maisa. A good thought, God connects it to action. Which is, you're with me?
Yeah.
Let me first share my screen with you guys. Which is this is the concept that you're quoting, which is when you have a thought, although thought doesn't have the power to affect the world around you, but God considers it and fills in the blanks. This is something which is a powerful idea that we learn, that it's kind of like a gift from God. If you had good intentions, HaKadosh Baruch Hu mitzarfa l'maisa. God makes the act, considers as if it was done, although it wasn't done. At the end of the day, if you had an intention to give the poor man food, he's still hungry. I don't care what intention you had. But in terms of your own accomplishment, God considers it done, which is a very difficult thing to understand. And I'm not going to get into that this time, but it's definitely a good point. It's a good thing to mention in this class, which is that when we have good thoughts, God fills in the blanks, which is a very powerful idea. Let us catch up over here. This is Rashi. Okay. So far we said that the thoughts do have the power to sanctify something. On the other hand, we have over here in text 8 a tractate of Me'ilah, which seems to connote the opposite. The Talmud says as follows: for a bird sin offering misuse applies once it has been sanctified. And the question is, at what point has it been sanctified? Says Rashi, sanctified by the mouth. Even if one benefited from it while alive, such as selling it and rendering it consecrated. So Rashi seems to say that in order for it to be sanctified, it has to be sanctified by the mouth, while thought is not enough. While in the previous Rashi from the tractate of Shavuot, Rashi seemed to say that no, in the case of bringing a korban, in the case of bringing a sacrifice, once you have the thought, it is holy. And here is the question. It seems to be a contradiction in Rashi. On the one hand, Rashi says that a thought is enough. On the other hand, Rashi says, through the mouth,
the animal is sanctified? And this is a question. I'm going to move a little bit because we only have 20 minutes, but this is a question that the Rebbe, our Rebbe, which is up there, and at a younger age, looked like that, wrote to, well, we can't really see it so much. You want to shut the light further from me? Yes. Our Rebbe wrote this question to his father, to his saintly father. They were living apart. They would write letters back and forth. We don't have the letter that he wrote to his father, but we do have the letter that was returned from his father to him. And the letter is quoted over here in text 9. I have it here at length up here, which cannot be read, but I'll just tell you the gist of it, which is the Rebbe is asking his father, A, about this contradiction. How could Rashi in one place say that thought sanctifies an animal, where in another place it says that it doesn't? And primarily he's asking him about that part of the Likutei Torah which we read before, that the Alter Rebbe, the first Chabad Rebbe, Rabbi Shneur Zalman, wrote in his Likutei Torah that our speech has the power to sanctify an animal. And he went at length to talk about how the speech has the power to bring back down the makif, the surrounding light, which makes it holy. And he asked, seemingly we know from here and from many other places, it's a very long letter, and he quotes many different thoughts, many different things. He says that we see from all these different places that indeed thoughts have the power to make something holy. Why is it that the Rebbe writes that you need speech to make it holy? And his father wrote to him saying, I'm very surprised by your question. I'm very surprised that you wouldn't have thought of this yourself. You must have been in a great haste, which is why you wrote to me. But it seems very simple. It seems that when Rashi says that thoughts make it holy, he's talking about your own obligation. He's saying if you have a thought, then you're obligated. But it doesn't actually make the animal holy. Kol nadiv libo, when are you obligated to bring it, even when you had a thought? But for it to be holy, like Rashi said, it has to be done with your mouth. And that's what the Alter Rebbe is saying. To make it holy, to bring holiness on it, it has to be done with your mouth. Now, apparently, the Rebbe wasn't in such a haste, because the Rebbe received this letter, but he did not agree with this letter. And he wrote back another letter asking for many other sources, including a Rambam, which we have on text number 12. Let us go to this Rambam quickly. Connie, you could read for us text number 12. I don't think the mic is going to work, but at this point.
Regarding vows and donations, one does not need to say anything with his lips. If he resolved in his heart without expressing anything aloud, he is obligated. How so? If he decided in his heart that this is an olah, or that he will bring an olah, he is obligated to bring it. As it says, every generous-hearted person shall bring it.
Okay, so here it seems to be a very clear Maimonides, which is a very clear law, that if someone had a thought, it is holy. Again, maybe it's arguable whether it is holy or there's only the obligation on the person to bring it, but this was the Rebbe's point. And again, there were many other sources that were brought. And I'll give you the basic argument on both sides in terms of the halachic perspective. And the basic argument on both sides in terms of the halachic perspective is that the Rebbe will argue in terms of that Rashi that said that it has to be with your mouth, that Rashi perhaps wasn't saying the minimum obligation to make something holy, he was saying the maximum. He was saying it doesn't have to be action to make it holy. Speech is enough, but he wasn't excluding thought. His point was, action is not necessary. Even speech makes it holy, but thought would also make it holy. That's what the Rebbe wants to suggest would be the answer for this contradiction of Rashi. Rashi said that thought makes it holy. Rashi says that speech makes it holy. Says the Rebbe, speech makes it holy, thought also makes it holy. When Rashi said speech makes it holy, he's just saying that you don't have to have action to make it holy. Yes.
Oh, how much are you donating? Like, oh, I don't know, $50 or whatever. But
That's a
it's
great,
not separate.
that's a great question. And so I'm going to get that in a second. The flip side, the other opinion says, well, what about this Maimonides? You know, the other opinion says, no, you need speech to make it holy. Thought doesn't make it holy. But the Maimonides clearly says that you don't need speech to make it holy. So they say, you know what the Maimonides is saying? Maimonides is saying if you do an action, like write it on a piece of paper, or you put it aside physically with your hand, says Maimonides, in that case, thought is enough. You don't need speech. If you have an action, then you don't need speech. Thought is enough.
Message is enough.
Definitely. That's literally an action. That's definitely enough. But you hear over you see over here, excuse me, an interesting debate, and the logic on both sides, a little bit of a Talmudic discussion over here, which is on one side the argument is saying that speech is enough is just saying that you don't need action. Speech is already enough, but it's not saying that thought is not enough. The flip side is exactly the opposite. No, you don't. Thought doesn't do anything. You need speech or action, but if you have action, you don't need speech. Yes?
No, I'm just agreeing with you. It's very interesting.
This is interesting.
That's the
Yeah, the
saying,
logic is
action
very
speaks.
interesting.
Yeah, that's where does the saying, actions speak louder than words?
I think it's also just the assumption that, when you're reading into something, you're reading into something.
There's depth.
Yeah, but you're reading, like, sometimes you're misreading into it.
Right. That's true.
Well, because
Yeah.
then your emotions are taking over. If you're kind of like, you might be misreading it.
Well, like if somebody says it's thought or I'm saying it's thought or action, or it's not.
Right.
It's it's like, but what if it was both? Well, they didn't necessarily mean that exclusion.
Exactly.
But
Let us
then you
move
actually-
on. Let us move on because we're running a little late. So there's a text here which I cannot read, I think. I have a quote of it. No, I don't have a quote of it on here. Let me see if I think I could pull it up here and maybe share it with you guys on the Zoom. Maybe a little clearer because I translated it with ChatGPT. There's a letter that a man wrote by the name of Obzev Volv Greenglass, which the picture is up on the screen. And he wrote a letter to the Rebbe asking about something that the Rebbe wrote once. The Rebbe wrote a book. His first compilation is called Hayom Yom, day to day. And every day there's a quote. Every day there's the message of the day. And one of the days, the quote is about purifying the ear, going green. Let's purify the ear. And the Rebbe says, just like physically, you have to have pure, healthy ear to live in. Spiritually, too, we have to have healthy ear. And the Rebbe says, when we study Torah, we purify the ear. And therefore, the Rebbe had a campaign that when you go on the street, and the Rebbe says, when you go into the subway, when you're driving down the road, you should say words of Torah. You should have things in your mind that you know by heart, that you could say, and that purifies the ear. Traditionally, as a Hasidic boy, I always knew if you got lost, the reason is because that place needed to be purified. So don't leave it until you say some Torah, because that will purify the ear.
There's no amount of Torah that you could say in August in the subways to purify the air.
You got to try. Don't underestimate the power of Torah. So the Rebbe wrote a very interesting thing. In this saying, he wrote that you should speak or even think. So the Rebbe suggested that thoughts purify the ear. And I'm just going to read to you what the Rebbe wrote to Reb Zelf Greenglass. So he wrote to the Rebbe, asking the Rebbe, is this true? That thoughts have such a power to elevate outside of yourself? Seemingly, thoughts are personal. Thoughts are purely personal, which I know we didn't have enough time to really get into that properly, but that's We have touched upon that. And the Rebbe wrote to him, the actions of a person upon the world around him occur through action, speech, or thought. And we find this in Jewish law, several instances, where thought creates an effect even on something outside the person who is thinking. The examples of this can be divided into types. The highest among them is the concept that the action is accomplished by thought. An action could be accomplished by thought, even when there is no speech or physical action at all. For example, the sanctification of a sacred donation, as discussed in Shavuot 26b, the Rambam, and the Rambam, the Rebbe quotes what we just read over here, where it is clear that the animal becomes sanctified through the person's thoughts alone. Not only is the person obligated, says the Rebbe, to verbally consecrate the animal and bring it as a donation, but his thought alone accomplishes the sanctification. So the Rebbe is clearly holding on to his opinion in this area about the power of thought. This is questioned in the language of Rashi and Tosfos. As we said, it is a question. Let me just skip it a little bit. And the Rebbe suggests, the Rebbe brings a few other sources of where this gets complicated. But in any case, the Rebbe stipulates this idea that speech makes it holy. Okay. Let me stop over there in regards to that. For the final text, before I show you a nice clip, we'll wrap it up. Here we have a quote of it on the last text, text 14, but I want to show it to you here if I could read it. I think I could read it on the screen.
Yeah.
And the Rebbe wrote as follows. This is in the Kutei Sichot. This is a Sicha of the Rebbe. The Rebbe wrote as follows. From this, we learn the great value of a person's knowledge and thoughts, both in the positive and the negative. On the negative side, we learn the importance of being cautious about harmful thoughts. Not only do these thoughts have negative effects on the person themselves, but they also harm the world around them. On the positive side, we see tremendous elevation and necessity of thinking good thoughts. When a person thinks well of others, in addition to helping them through actions or words, their good thoughts also have a significant impact. When you think good about another person, it affects that person. When every Jew thinks only good thoughts about others, God combines these good thoughts with actions. Robert, that's your quote right there. God combines these good thoughts with actions, causing these thoughts to eventually manifest in actions and speech. This process brings out the hidden good within each person, regardless of their state, which will come into action in their thoughts, speech, and deeds in their daily life through the observance of Torah and mitzvot. So once we have the thought, God is there to help us. Sometimes we say that the idea of promising to do something good is helpful because it brings God into the picture. God says, I'm going to help you do that. Oh, and this brings us to our last idea. Think good, it will be good. Right up there. Yes. So all the Rebbes have constantly said this line, think good, it will be good. Trach gut wird sein gut. And the message being that we believe that our thoughts will change reality. We believe that when we think that God will be there for us, He will be there for us. And to finish off this class, I want to show you a quick video, which will, right here, which will show us three different stories. I think it's three different stories where the Rebbe has told us, think good, it will be good, and that will change your reality. Let me make this bigger. Okay.
בדרך הידישע הויז, זי זך פול מיט ביטוח. In der Meibischen, mit Zutake, bederach Hatewe, was mit Dafton, mit Gia Kapecho, mit der Gashmitike Evri. Aber hat nicht keine Teiges, worin der Rebischter 4 Tonnen mit Ter und mit jeder Prat von seinem Leben und seiner Familie.
In 1951, my youngest sister, Amina, she wasn't quite 2 years old. My mother brought boiling water up into the bathroom. She ran downstairs and she came up. Amina was in that boiling water, in that big pail of boiling water. They took her to the sick children's hospital. They said the kidneys may have burned through. The heart may give out from the stress. And the lungs were also compromised. It was Thursday. They said that she's not going to live the day. My father turned to his brother-in-law, Rabbi Chodakov, and asked him to speak to the Rebbe. The Rebbe said, make a Kiddush this Shabbos and things will be all right. Nobody felt like making a Kiddush.
Okay.
Defin Beit Amuna und Beit Teras Chaim.
Okay. Thank you for joining us. With that, we close this. If you have, please, for the future weeks, continue to send me questions, because every week we choose a question. This was a question of, I think this was Joanne's question. But this was,
Never had any children.
the Rebbe never had any children, that's true.
We
See
could
day to
probably-
day.
And please join us. Yes.
Are we on for next weekend?
God willing, we're on for next weekend. Yes.
So we're gonna be we'll be on Zoom if that's possible.
Sure.
We'll be in Florida.
Okay.
Okay.
See day.
Unless you're in your schedule.
Okay.
Much for thought, literally. Thank you, Rabbi.
My pleasure.
I like that video.
My pleasure. How do I stop this meeting?
Judy,
Thank you, Rabbi.
do you go in the class?
My pleasure. Thank you, Barry, for joining us.
Thank you.
You might enjoy that.
Get out of the share.
If you're free. 9 to 10
Locked in on there.
Friday morning, yes. You have
Oh, I
WhatsApp.
See where it says stop
I
share?
don't have that, how do you? Oh, it's a Zoom, so it's very convenient. Where you go? I
And
just
then at the
came back.
bottom,
Same office.
somewhere there should be.
It should be fine right there. Okay, have a great one.
I'm in Boynton.